As the sixth great-grandson of President Thomas Jefferson and his slave Sally Hemings, news anchor and social media influencer Shannon LaNier knew he had, to say the least, an interesting family heritage. But when he decided to co-author the book Jefferson's Children, The Story of One American Family, Shannon took a deep dive into his family history and unearthed some difficult and complex but insightful truths. And he connected to relatives he had never met in the process as well. Shannon joins me now to share what he discovered, what the Jefferson Hemings legacy means to him and his family, and what he hopes others can learn from their story. Shannon, what's up?
Hey, so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah, so now let's talk about this amazing finding. When did you first find out about you being a descendant of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings?
I've always known my entire life. It was just one of those things we grew up knowing through the oral history of the family. My mother told us that we were descendants, and a lot of family members did a lot of background work before me to make sure that the foundation was laid so I could one day know who I am and where I come from.
What does that mean to you?
The legacy of my ancestors is complicated because, we go back to a president, but we also go back to a slave owner. A lot of people don't like to talk about that aspect, but I think you have to take Thomas Jefferson and his totality. That this was a man who owned over 600 slaves, and that makes you angry that he enslaved that many people that were my family members, and then had children with one of them. So it's complex. You're proud of his accomplishments and the things he did as a founding father, but he also founded this country and the people in it because they were his family members. So it's complicated. Sometimes you like him, sometimes you hate him, and you're just angry that he didn't do more for the benefit of those that were enslaved. An abolitionist once said, when they were trying to get Thomas Jefferson to join the cause, they said, "Here is a man," I'm paraphrasing, they said, "Never before has a man received such fame for something he did not do," because he preached it but didn't do it.
I know you said that your family kind of already knew, you've always known. Do you know how they traced back the lineage to the Jefferson and Hemings?
Well, a lot of it was the oral history. Monticello, which is the house that Thomas Jefferson lived at, it's now a museum and is a historical landmark. But, they used doctors, lawyers, DNA, oral history, documentation, everything to be able to prove that Jefferson fathered these children with Sally Hemings. And it was through our family oral history and documentation that they were also able to trace it back to who begot, who begot, who begot. But then when you had DNA and all this extra evidence, and it all points back as Jefferson fathering, at least 6 of Sally Hemings' children.
Do you know what happened to the children Jefferson and Hemings had together?
We can't find all of the children. We know that Thomas Jefferson, when he began his relationship, whatever you want to call it, I call it his encounter with Sally Hemings, she became pregnant in Paris. That's where they were. And she was a free woman in Paris because slavery wasn't permitted at the time. And he said, "If you return to the US with me, I will make sure we free all of our children at the age of 21. And so she decided to return back to the US with him, and he upheld his bargain. He freed their children at the age of 21. Now, there's some discrepancy with regard to the first child, whether it lived or died. However, the other children, the ones that lived, 4 lived to adulthood. Now, 2 of those were allowed to run away. They called it run away because they were put on a stagecoach, given $50, and seen to safety. That's how they ran away. And they passed into white society. So we don't know where they are at this point.
Wow.
They may not know who they are and where their lineage lies, because of once you pass into white society, it's an irreversible decision for safety purposes to make sure that you can stay free and alive. So, we're learning more about that side of the family and looking into some possible descendants from them. That's Beverly and Harriet. Now, the last 2, Madison and Eston, I'm from the Madison line, and I have Eston cousins that I know. So we are able to track 2 of those lines. But Eston also at one point passed for white and passed into the white society. So they almost didn't know who they were. But it was found out later in their life from the descendants that are alive today that now know who they are and where their actual ancestry lies. But for the Madison line, we've always known our heritage. We stayed in the Black community, and so we do know where those ancestors are. But I'm still meeting a lot of Madison cousins today, and people coming out the woodwork. So it's exciting to continue to meet family and see it all grow. And of course, we've been meeting the Jefferson side still too.
So what happened to Sally after Jefferson's death?
She was freed by his daughter, moved down to Charlottesville, and she stayed there until she died. And then her children moved to Ohio, where my family is all from. My mother and her family is all from the Ohio area. So they pretty much stayed in that Ohio area, Southern Ohio, around the Chillicothe area, Marlborough County. That's where they lived.
So now tell us about your book, Jefferson's Children, The Story
Mhm.
of One American Family, which is an ALA Best Book for Young Adults. Congrats on that. That's
Thank
huge.
you.
Yeah, so
Thank
when
you.
and why did you decide to write this?
Well, this was an exciting project. You see one of the books here, and there's another one there. That's the second edition. And I co-authored the book with Jane Feldman, who's a photojournalist and author out of New York. And it was just an amazing experience. We met at Monticello when Lucian K. Truscott invited the descendants of Thomas Jefferson's enslaved woman, Sally Hemings, to come to the reunion of Thomas Jefferson's descendants from his wife, Martha Jefferson. So it's hard to say Jefferson and Hemings because we're all Jefferson.
Mhm.
And it's hard to
Right.
say black and white because the family's so mixed up. It's not
Yeah.
one or the other. So we just distinguish it by saying Sally Hemings' ancestors and Thomas Jefferson's wife Martha's descendants. So you got Sally's descendants and Martha's descendants. So that's how he invited us all together at Monticello, and that's where I met Jane Feldman. And after everything went down with the family, and we were able to get this one amazing picture that Jane wanted to take of all the family standing on the steps of Monticello together. When we had an opportunity to take that picture, she said, "Oh my gosh," I helped her with the process. And she said, "We got to work together." And I was like, "Okay." And she's like, how would you feel about writing a book about your family and traveling the country to meet them?" And I was,
Wow.
19 at the time. I was like, "Okay, cool. That sounds fun." So but it was an amazing experience. Jane and I went around the country meeting, four generations of descendants from Jefferson's wife, Martha, and his enslaved woman, Sally Hemings. And it was an amazing experience to be able to let these people, for the first time, tell their stories, to talk about their heritage that for many years only maybe historians and people from Monticello may have told. But now we were able to tell our stories and give our voice weight. And, it was an amazing process to talk to so many people who shared their in-depth and intimate stories of how they grew up, how they were perceived, how they perceived color, what they thought about Jefferson, what they thought about the encounters he had with Sally Hemings. So, you hear so many stories, and I think they can relate to a lot of people. We call it the subtitle, the story of one American family, because we are just one American family. We just
Right.
happen to link back to a president, but some of the stories you hear aren't different from a lot of stories you'll hear in the Black community, at least, because you go to a family reunion in the Black community, they look just like all them colors right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. So how'd you find all those people?
We knew some of them from the reunion. We knew a lot of them. And then sometimes people say, "Oh, you really got to talk to, and who you should
Uh-huh.
talk to. Oh, this
Uh-huh.
person has this story, this, they have
Wow.
that." And that's just like when people say, "How did they get started with finding their journey?" Talk to your family. You talk to the people that are around you, talk to the people that you think are most knowledgeable about your family. They have stories, they have traditions, they have memories that they can tell you and share with you that may lead you to the next link or the next piece of your puzzle, I like to say.
Were you feeling nervous about what you might find out about your family history, knowing that, Sally was a slave?
It was about just hearing stories of discrimination, racism, triumph, stories of forgiveness and healing and reconciliation, stories
Mhm.
of fear and people who had Confederate flags tattooed on their body, and people who
Yeah.
didn't understand the story, people who were finding out they were Black for the first time, what that does to people. Some people in the Black community who felt like they were never dark enough to be accepted by the Black community, never light enough to be accepted by the white community, so they were stuck in the middle. My mother even talking about looking white, but raising Black boys
Mm.
and the struggles that she had to go through. So it's something for everyone to take home and to really understand and really to connect with, to empathize with, and to hopefully come to a better place of understanding race relations in this country, and how each and every one of us can be a part in healing that and those wounds of this country, but also be a part of making this country a better place.
So tell us about your experience when you spent the night at Monticello and then meeting your family, 1999 at the Jefferson home.
Two different experiences. The meeting everybody for the first time in 99 was amazing. I didn't know what to expect. That was when
Yeah.
Lucian had invited us down to Monticello for a reunion. That was on the Oprah Winfrey show, so a lot of people saw that. But then
Yeah.
going down there, I was like, oh, it was exciting because I was going to get to meet these people I have always heard about, wondered about. Just
Hmm.
let's go. And so we went down there. Some received us well, and others were not as nice, as nice as
Really?
they could have been. Yeah,
Wow.
they didn't know what to expect either, and they thought, "Here come these people trying to take land and take what we have." I was like, "We
Wow.
don't want nothing you got. We
Yeah.
just want our birthright.
Yeah.
If anything, our family has been through way more than your family has,
Yeah.
so we just want to get to know the family. That's all we wanted."
So Shannon, when you spent the night at Monticello, what did you experience?
It was emotional. It pulls out your heartstrings because you're here on this beautiful plantation. You want to connect with your ancestors, and it was sort of like an experience, an immersion experience to see what they would have gone through. But you really can never imagine what they would have gone through because I'm there in 2020 and experiencing a very different environment. I had my cell phone, I had people around me. They had animals running around, animal smells all over the place themselves after working all day. They didn't bathe every day, so they were working in the fields day in and day out, and then had to be in their, places. And the floor I slept on was a mud floor. So that was like it got really cold at night. It was uncomfortable. They only got sheets and new clothes once a year. So, it was a traumatic experience to be able to imagine what they went through, but still, you can never really imagine unless you were there. But it was a powerful and unforgettable experience to be able to take part in that and be able to just get a glimpse of what my ancestors might have went through.
Wow. From that whole experience, do you feel like Monticello is a better memorial of who Jefferson was than the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C.?
I totally do because Monticello is doing the right thing. They're teaching people the way history should be taught. They're giving you all the information and then letting you decide how you feel about it. They're not trying to sugarcoat it and say one thing or not. Now, 50 years ago, it was different. 50, 40 years ago, you go to Monticello, they act like the slaves didn't exist and Jefferson did everything by himself. But now they're telling the full story of who Jefferson was as not only the president and founding father, but as a slave owner, and they show you where the slaves lived, what they did, how they worked, and how smart they were, how crafty they were, and all of these amazing aspects of what life was like. So you have some context to put with the entire story. It's not just he's on a pedestal at the Jefferson Memorial in DC saying this is a great man who wrote the Declaration of Independence. No, tell us the full story. We're smart enough. We can handle it. And then let us decide how we want to vision this guy, how we want to see him, and how we want him to represent us as a people.
How have you reconciled the history of your ancestry between the fact that Hemings was an enslaved woman who has children by her slaveholder, a president, like we said, and a founding father of the United States who preached equality, which he didn't practice?
You know, I, it's difficult because it is painful, and you do get angry a lot at some of the things that went on, but you have to continue moving. You can't let that anger consume you and consume your soul, so you have to pretty much put it behind you and say, that was history, that was then. I have to make sure I do my part to make sure it's never forgotten and that it never happens again. So I think a lot of people want to just put it behind them and say, oh, it didn't happen, oh, it was so long ago. But like, no, we need to acknowledge this, because to act like it didn't happen takes away the blood, sweat, and the tears that my family put into this country, into the foundation of not only Monticello, not only the presidency, but this country. And so we have to talk about it. So many people want us to move on and act like slavery didn't happen. No, it happened. It was horrible. And we know who took part in that. So let's acknowledge that and not just put Jefferson on a pedestal and act like he was a great hero. He was also a person who owned human beings. We have to address it. We have to recognize it. We have to discuss it. And then we can get to a point of healing and reconciliation. But we can't get there until we start talking.
Yeah. I know that you appeared in an Ancestry.com commercial, right?
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. We reenacted the signing of the Declaration of Independence with all living descendants of the original signers. And so it was
Wow.
pretty amazing. And, you pull out, you meet all these people, and you black, white, Asian, Indian, so many different ethnicities all mixed into one group. And then they're signing, and posing in this replica of the actual painting, and they're reciting the words of the Declaration of Independence. And you
Wow.
pull out, and it's like all these people are all descendants of the original signers. It's like, oh wow, this is what America has become, a melting pot, if you will.
Yeah. So why do you encourage people to find out about their ancestry, even if they're apprehensive about what they might find out?
I think it's amazing to know where you come from and what has gone on in your family previously. And a lot of people say you don't know where you're going unless you know where you come from. I don't necessarily agree with that, because a lot of people don't know where they come from and may never be able to find out where they come from, but they can still make sure they're going in the right direction.
So talk to us about in 2020, how you participated in the project American Descendants with Smithsonian Magazine.
I wanted to partake in that because I wanted my voice heard. I wanted my ancestors and my, history to be told. I want people to realize that, yes, Jefferson was a founding father, but he was also a slave owner. And this is what happened with Sally Hemings.
Yeah.
So I wanted to show that. And I guess the project was to dress me up in period clothing like Jefferson would have worn at
And
the time.
going viral. And going viral with that. That literally was everywhere.
Yeah, it was amazing because they morphed our faces together, and you're like, see the side, like, wow, like I never thought I looked like Jefferson. But then that came out. I was like, oh.
I saw a little something, like, I'll hold you. I was like, I can kind of see it. Where can everybody follow you on social media?
I am mainly on TikTok at Mr. Shannon LaNier, but also across other platforms as Mr. Shannon LaNier as well, on Instagram, Twitter, all that stuff. But TikTok is where I get to really cut loose and have fun, because I do these segments called News Anchor Dad, and I get to have a lot of fun with my kids playing around and using my news anchor voice to reprimand them or talk about them or something that they're doing. So it's a lot of fun to be able to especially as a news anchor, when you're used to doing stuff that's so doom and gloom all the time, you want to have a little fun. You want to be able to laugh and bring joy to other people as well. So that's what I try to do on social media.
Awesome. Now, Shannon, let us know, what's your American dream?
Ooh, for me or for America?
Give me both.
Okay. Well, for myself, I think my American dream is to just be able to do what I love doing on television, just bringing news and information to people while raising an amazing family with peace and comfort and joy in their hearts, to be able to, have a house, have property, have maybe even a business on the side where I'm just enjoying my best life, if you will.
Yeah.
And for America, I just pray for peace, for so many levels, because there's just so much unrest, destruction, discrimination going around in this country. Peace would solve a lot of that. Just peace amongst people in their communities, peace amongst the different races, peace among Democrats and Republicans. There's so many aspects of peace.
Absolutely. Shannon LaNier, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate all this, and hopefully it continues to get the word out.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you. Back to the studio.
Thanks for watching. For more Bradshaw Live, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.